All right, here we are, guys, for DLD1 of possibly many throughout this 9 weeks. We're going to get to psychological disorders today, so hopefully, just get you some good content that should be interesting as we go through this digital learning platform. But hey, two reminders off the top. Number one, assignment still for you AP psychology people, that parenting values form. Got to have 5 people get that in by this Thursday. That thing is still due, even though we're going through this digital learning phase, and that's worth 50 points. So that's big points. If you're not sure people have got 5 in for you, just like I said, Canvas, message me, ask me, hey, have 5 people got in, and I'll get right back with you. Number two, try to attend that Canvas conference later on. Really interested to see how that will work and if that's something that we can go to throughout this period where we're not going to be with each other face to face. So please log in if you can. It'll be mostly like review based, maybe going over a couple things, but more just interactive. So really interested to see if that will work, and it could be maybe something we can use some more throughout this 9 weeks. But for now, let's get straight to these notes. I'm going to shrink my big old face here so you guys don't have to look at that. And going to pull up the notes for you real quick. Like I said, the main thing that we are talking about today is psychological disorders. So we're going to get right to it. So biggest thing we're going to try to get to today in a short amount of time is how do you define psychological disorders? Because psychological disorders, a lot of people think they know it when they see it. They can see somebody that's depressed, or they definitely can tell somebody if it's bipolar. But what we got to understand here is this is a very in-depth process to go through diagnosing somebody with a psychological disorder, and we do it through the DSM-5, which you'll hear a lot about today, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. So that's going to be a big part of today's discussion. But first off, let's talk about what is not a psychological disorder definition. First off, we never use the word normal. Just don't use the word normal. I mean, I know the book doesn't help when it calls it abnormal psychology sometimes, but that's not how we can look at whether somebody is exhibiting signs of a psychological disorder or not. As you guys know, some people could be normal and still making bad or wrong decisions. This guy that I got a picture of right here is a guy who's like a street preacher who stands outside all the Indianapolis Colts games and tries to preach to these people as they're coming out of Lucas Oil Stadium, sometimes angry, sometimes inebriated, and most of us would consider that behavior not normal. Does that mean he has a psychological disorder? No, it does not. Okay. And a lot of times, sometimes going with the crowd is more self destructive. As I said right there in notes, cheating on your taxes or doing what your friends do is not always the best choice, not always the good thing. So now, a lot of people, there's maybe more truth to this one, right? Failure to adjust. Some people who go through some speed bumps in life just don't adjust well, right? And some psychologists say abnormal people are just ones who can adjust, and the rest of us can adjust to some of those hiccups in life. But if somebody has a relationship that goes bad and they're so unhappy they will not eat, or so much anxiety with relationships that they just like cut off all social contact, a lot of people would say, hey, that's a sign of a psychological disorder. Well, once again, we can't make it that simple. It's not that simple. One thing I want to be very clear about with psychological health is we don't think about it like physical health, but we need to start thinking about like physical health, because a lot of times with physical health, people talk about there's a good way to physically take care of yourself, and you guys know what that is. It's exercising, it is getting outside, social contact, which is kind of hard right now, right? But it's also eating right and just developing good habits. Well, there is an ideal way to function psychologically as well, and psychologists argue that there is this ideal way that we don't really think about. There's been a lot of back and forth about this. You look at the insanity defense and the criminal justice term of insane. What does that mean? Somebody has a psychological disorder that may harm the way that they're thinking, and not knowing right from wrong, maybe even being part of like a detached reality and not understanding that their choices have consequences. So all this stuff put together just really hurts our quest to find out what psychological disorders truly are. So let's try to clear this up best we can, right? Psychological disorders are disturbed behavior, dysfunctional behavior, maladaptive behavior, right? And those things are a little different, right? Like disturbed behavior may be somebody who is, thinking about things all the time that, cause them anxiety. Dysfunctional behavior may be behavior that doesn't allow you to hold down a job or doesn't allow you to form close relationships like most people are able to. And then maladaptive behavior, that is that change, right? Like if somebody has a change that happens in their life and they don't adapt to it the way that most people are able to do, that could be a sign of a psychological disorder. So, best definition that we got for it is right here: a syndrome that is marked by clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotion regulation, or behavior. The important thing I want to point out here is within this definition, right, it says an individual's emotion regulation. Can you see that from the outside? Yeah, you probably can. If somebody doesn't regulate their emotions very well, a lot of times that can be seen by a third party. Behavior, right? Like behavior can be seen by a third party, but individual cognition cannot. You don't know what's going on in somebody's head. And that's why a lot of times some of these psychological disorders go a long time without being diagnosed, because we just can't see it, right? So unless it manifests itself in some type of emotion regulation or behavior, it's hard for us to find that individual cognition aspect of it. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, we do try to follow the medical model. And the medical model, I mean, what happens in the medical field, right? You exhibit symptoms, and you go in and they try to match those symptoms up to a diagnosis, right? And that's what we do with almost all diseases. You guys have heard a lot about that with the COVID-19 or the coronavirus right now, right? Like, what are the actual symptoms, and do they match up with COVID-19 or do they match up with the common flu, right? There's like some carryover. And sometimes in the medical field, people do get misdiagnosed. You go in, you get diagnosed with the flu, and it turns out it's mono, right? Well, the same thing happens in psychology, right? With mental illness, we do follow the medical model. We have a strict field of symptoms and characteristics of behavior that go with these disorders. And when somebody comes in to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, we look at those symptoms, we try to document those symptoms, and we try to match them up to the disorder that best fits. And do we get it wrong sometimes? Yes, we do. But we get it wrong in the medical field sometimes as well. So that's kind of my point is a lot of cases we diagnose and then we treat, and we find out if the treatment's working or not. And if the treatment's not working, then obviously we need to reevaluate. So even though some people would say the medical model in the medical field is a lot more direct and a lot more scientific than what we do in psychology, it really is the same model. We're trying to follow the same medical model in psychology for classifying these psychological disorders. So what kind of things do we look for? Well, let's talk about classification. First off, and this may be the most important thing for us, all right? I want to kind of lead a little discussion later on in Canvas discussions, Canvas conferences about this. But you got to keep in mind that mild psychological disorders are very common. And it's only a problem if the disorder is enough to disrupt everyday life. And that is the phrase you will hear over and over and over. Is it enough to disrupt your everyday life, right? Some of you guys are very organized. Some of you guys keep a very strict calendar of things that you are going to do throughout the day. Does that mean you have a psychological disorder just because you're more organized than the normal person? No, it doesn't, right? Is that some symptoms of a mild psychological disorder? Possibly, but you would not be diagnosed with it just by being an organized person. Same way that somebody has mood swings and kind of goes from happy to sad fairly quickly is not going to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. We have to look at does the symptoms disrupt your everyday life? And a lot of times within the DSM-5, and you look at that diagnostic criteria, you'll see that come up over and over again. It'll say something like you have to match 3 of the following 7 criteria. And if you only match 2, a lot of times you're not diagnosed with that specific psychological disorder. But, here's some examples, right? People who are extremely superstitious. Am I superstitious? No, I'm not, okay? But you hear some people talking about, full moon all the time, Friday the 13th, black cats down here. Some people think the Cubs are cursed. No, they were just really, really bad for a really, really long time, okay? Has nothing to do with psychological disorders or, anything else. So a problem with classification is a lot of times it is, an eye of the beholder, I guess. So what do psychiatrists and psychologists try to do? Well, we try to look for causes and symptoms, just like in physical diseases. Like I said, that medical model. And it's very difficult sometimes. It's hard to categorize. So the system that we have that everybody uses, it is universal, is the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. And that 5, what's that stand for? Most of you probably know. means it's the fifth edition we have of this, right? Like the fifth time we've revised it in a major way. And the fifth edition was just less than 7 years ago. So this is fairly recent with this DSM-5. And there were some big changes made in that last edition. So that's kind of one of the things I want to talk about a little bit later. So first off, labeling psychological disorders. There's some problems that we have, right? You read about Rosenhan's study in the book and the power of labels, right? Like sometimes even the preconception of having a psychological disorder can stigmatize. You think about some of these very stigmatizing disorders like depression, schizophrenia, and how they're even portrayed in the media sometimes. And that's what I talk about with stereotypes of the mentally ill there. A lot of time Hollywood does not do any favors to these mental disorders and how they're viewed in public. And a lot of times, just like somebody who deals with alcoholism, it can be stigmatized and almost used to identify the person, right? Like there are these certain illnesses and these certain addictions where we actually call the person the disease, and that kind of is the first indication that that's a stigmatized disorder, right? What do you call an alcoholic? An alcoholic, right? Somebody who has schizophrenia symptoms, they are called schizophrenics. Antisocial personality psychopaths and sociopaths. So a lot of times these psychological disorders can be stereotyped and can be stigmatized. Talk about rates of psychological disorders. Well, the United States is up there, guys. You look at all of these charts, and the United States is leading the way with not only serious mental disorders, but mental disorders in general. And then you look at the percentage of Americans that have disorders diagnosed in the past year. And it's a list that you might expect, but there's probably some percentages that probably surprise you on there. Phobias fairly high, and mood disorders very high. Maybe obsessive compulsive disorder is lower than you would think. Maybe post-traumatic stress is higher than you think. So yeah, just to give you an idea of some of the rates of these psychological disorders. And just like, I keep on going back to physical diseases, right? There's a lot of things that are protective factors, things you can do to prevent some of these diseases from happening. Psychological disorders are the exact same way, guys. You look at the risk factors over here, and some of them are controllable and some of them are not, right? You think about cancer in the medical field, right? Some cancers like lung cancer and throat cancer and things like that, liver cancer. A lot of times those are brought on by our lifestyle, and we can prevent them, and there are some things that we can do to protect ourselves against those. Some other ones we really don't have control over, right? Like family history and heart disease running in your family. That's not something you have control over, but there are protective factors that we find for almost all mental disorders. And, look at the top of the list. That's something we've talked about a lot, right? Aerobic exercise, community involvement, offers empowerment, effective parenting. Just go down the list and you can see a lot of these things that we can do that are protective factors against psychology. So, look, here's your assignment for today, right? You guys have a discussion in the Canvas discussions, and it's labeled changes to the DSM-5. So several years ago when the DSM-4 got a huge revision, there were some major things that were changed going into the DSM-5. And I've kind of listed some bullet points here of the most major ones, right? The ones that were very controversial, the ones that people were very, angry about, to be honest, when they first came out and they were being discussed and all this kind of stuff. So what I want you to do for your assignment is I want you to just take one of these, right? Just pick one of these bullet points that you see here that you might be interested in, right? Maybe you're interested in hoarding disorders. Maybe you've seen Hoarders on television, and you've kind of seen that show and been interested in that, or maybe you've heard of hypochondriacs before, and maybe you've never heard of illness anxiety disorder, and you want to know what the connection is there. Asperger's is like a high functioning autism that was diagnosed for years and years before the DSM-5 came out. Once the DSM-5 came out, they eliminated the Asperger's label and they made it part of autism spectrum disorder, which angered a lot of parents who had kids that had been identified and maybe even successfully treated as Asperger's. And what they found out was like Asperger's, which is high functioning autism, is no different than any other, spectrum on that autism spectrum. So whether it's high functioning or low functioning, it's still involved in that autism spectrum disorder. So they felt it was unnecessary. That angered a lot of parents, and it sent, maybe the medical care that they were getting into a little bit of a spin or a spiral. So look, here's your assignment for today. And this will just be a quick 15-point assignment. You're going to take one of these topics right here, your choice, and research them. Look them up on Google. I think the best thing to do is just make sure you're getting from some reputable websites, but just type in changes to DSM-5 and then follow it up with whatever category you pick. And what you will probably be taken to is the DSM website, or sometimes even the American Psychological Association. Those are reputable websites you can definitely get information from, and I guarantee you they're going to have a lot. So after you do that, go into your Canvas discussion page, see that changes to DSM assignment, and just post what area you picked, and then 3 bullet points as far as like 3 major changes in that area that were made. So, look, guys, hopefully this was pretty painless. And like I said, make sure and join in that Canvas conferences later. And we will get together and hopefully discuss some of this a little bit, maybe get some questions. By the way, sometime during this presentation, there was a little bit of a secret message somewhere in this thing, and first person that can find it and maybe Canvas message me, you get 5 points extra credit. So I'll make sure and post on my Twitter about who gets that and who got the 5 points extra credit. I'll go AP Psych each block, and I will also give regular psych 5 points extra credit. So one person in each block is going to get that 5 points extra credit, and I'll reveal those later. So hope you enjoyed this, guys, as much as you can for virtual learning. But you'll be seeing a lot of me later on through this platform. So hope you guys have a good one.